The sun rose blood red over the Mediterranean, painting the Beirut skyline in shades of amber and copper. Captain Robert Mitchell had been awake for 32 hours straight, positioned on a rooftop that smelled of concrete dust and decades-old warfare. His M40A1 sniper rifle rested against sandbags that had been there since the Civil War started, maybe longer. The weapon was an extension of his body now. 7 years as a Marine sniper had taught him that much. Through his scope, the world compressed to mathematics and patience. 1,200 meters away, across a landscape of shattered buildings in morning shadows, a white Mercedes moved through the checkpoint. Inside that vehicle rode a man responsible for 17 American deaths in the past month. Intelligence said he was meeting with Iranian operatives to plan something bigger, something that would make the previous attacks look like practice runs. Robert's spotter, a young corporal named Davies, whispered wind calculations. 12 miles per hour shifting, temperature already climbing toward 90 degrees, humidity thick enough to affect bullet trajectory. Robert made the calculations his father had taught him, his grandfather before that. Mathematics passed down through generations of men who understood that sometimes one perfect shot meant the difference between thousands living or dying. The Mercedes stopped. The target emerged. 6 bodyguards surrounding him, professional movements, eyes scanning rooftops. They'd learned to be careful. Americans had snipers. Everyone knew that. But nobody expected a shot from 1,200 meters. That was beyond standard doctrine, beyond what most men believed possible. Robert's finger found the trigger. His breathing slowed to that perfect pause between heartbeats, where the world steadied and time became negotiable. The mathematics aligned. Wind temperature, humidity, the slight downward angle, the movement pattern of the target walking toward the building entrance, variables clicking into place like tumblers in a lock. The shot broke clean, 1.4 seconds of bullet flight. The .308 round covered 1,200 meters through morning heat shimmer, past buildings that had witnessed decades of violence, through air molecules that pushed and pulled according to laws that didn't care about politics or terrorism or the names of the dying. The target dropped mid-stride. His bodyguards dove for cover weapons, rising, scanning for threats they'd never locate. By the time they understood what happened, Robert and Davies were already moving, breaking down their position, disappearing into the labyrinth of Beirut's broken architecture. 6 embassy personnel walking to work that morning never knew how close they'd come to being casualties of the explosive vest the target had been wearing. The intelligence had been good. The mathematics had been perfect. The mission succeeded. Robert Mitchell made it back to the Marine barracks with enough time to write a single entry in his field journal. Page 407, his last entry. Someday someone will need to make shots I never could. Pray it's not my daughter. But if it is, she'll be ready. The mathematics don't lie. They never have. 3 hours later, a truck bomb containing 12,000 pounds of TNT drove into the Marine barracks. 241 Americans died in the explosion. Robert Mitchell was among them, his journal recovered from the rubble by chaplains who sent it home with his personal effects. 8-year-old Sarah Mitchell watched the news coverage, not understanding that her father had made his greatest shot on the last day of his life, not knowing that his journal would become her inheritance, not realizing that mathematics and violence were about to become the defining relationship of her existence. All she knew was that Daddy wasn't coming home. Staff Sergeant Sarah Mitchell stood at the edge of Forward Operating Base Vanguard, watching the Afghan dawn paint the mountains in shades her father had described in his journal. Amber, copper, the same colors as Beirut 42 years and 10,000 miles away. She was 29 years old, medium height, lean from carrying heavy equipment through terrain that ate the unprepared. Dark hair pulled back in the regulation braid that disappeared under her patrol cap. Unremarkable in every way the military had taught her to be, except for the way she moved. Precise, economical, like someone who'd calculated the energy cost of every action and eliminated waste. The XM-110 semi-automatic sniper system rested against her shoulder with familiar weight. 7.62 millimeter NATO rounds capable of precision fire out to 800 meters officially. Sarah had made shots at distances that would make the manufacturer's engineers nervous, and ballistics experts question their understanding of physics. But she hadn't fired the weapon in combat in 8 months. Not since the incident that made her simultaneously the most dangerous and most buried soldier in the United States Army. Corporal Jake Harrison approached from the team room, young face already showing the weathering that came from 7 months in Helmand Province. 23 years old, sharp eyes that saw details others missed, still convinced he understood combat after less than a year of it. Morning, Mitchell, you're up early. Couldn't sleep. Thinking about the patrol. Thinking about everything. Harrison hesitated, then spoke the question that had been building for months. The guys have a pool going. Whether you'll actually take a shot this deployment. I didn't bet, but I'm curious. 8 months, 0 rounds fired in combat. That's got to be some kind of record for a sniper. Sarah continued watching the mountains, her voice flat. Professional. The tone that made people think she had the personality of a field manual. My job is to shoot when shooting solves problems, Harrison. Not to shoot because someone needs to prove something. Fair enough. What Harry-O didn't know, what only a handful of people with classified clearances knew, was that Sarah Mitchell had more confirmed kills than anyone in the battalion. Just not recently, not since 9 months ago, when she'd made a shot that violated enough laws of physics to make 3 governments uncomfortable and foreign intelligence services question whether America had developed experimental ammunition. The incident had earned her a forced transfer, buried file redactions, and explicit orders from Pentagon-level officers: disappear, blend in, never shoot like that again. She'd followed those orders for 8 months. Becoming invisible, the sniper who never fired. The specialist others whispered about, wondering if she'd lost her nerve, washed out, couldn't handle the pressure. Let them wonder. Invisible was safe. Invisible didn't draw attention. Invisible meant that she could do her job without 3-letter agencies fighting over who got to use her for operations that made her stomach turn. Sergeant First Class Marcus Rodriguez emerged from the Tactical Operations Center, 40 years old, and every one of them visible in the lines around his eyes. Gulf War veteran, 15 years leading Rangers through places where mistakes got people killed. Built like someone who'd carried heavy loads up mountains, presence that commanded respect without requiring volume. Mitchell, Harrison, team brief in 15. We've got movement. Sarah turned from the mountains. What kind of movement? The kind that needs eyes on. Grab your gear. The briefing room smelled like burnt coffee and the particular stress sweat that came from men who understood they might not come back from the day's work. 14 Rangers assembled around a map table that showed terrain Sarah had memorized weeks ago. Lieutenant Colonel Daniel Winters stood at the head of the table, 52 years old combat veteran who'd seen everything until recently. His presence meant this wasn't routine. Gentlemen, intelligence indicates Taliban activity in the Kunar province, specifically these coordinates. He tapped the map. Hindu Kush Mountains, elevation changes of 2,000 feet, visibility under 50 meters in the valleys. Command wants reconnaissance. Observe and report, no engagement unless absolutely necessary. Captain Victoria Hayes, the company commander, added context. 38 competent, respected by soldiers because she led from the front instead of hiding behind rank. This is intelligence gathering, not combat operations. The area has old Soviet fighting positions, elevation advantages, natural choke points. You go in careful, you observe, you come out clean. Questions. Sarah studied the map with intensity that made Rodriguez glance her way. She saw what others didn't. The old logging roads perfectly positioned for ambush. The ridge lines offering clear fields of fire. The valley floors that were natural kill zones for anyone stupid enough to walk into them. She said nothing. Speaking up drew attention. Attention was the opposite of invisible. Staff Sergeant Ryan Cooper, the assistant team leader, raised a practical question. 32 quiet competence, the kind of NCO who led by example. Rules of engagement, ma'am. Defensive only. You're hit, you defend and extract. You're not there to start a war just to see if anyone else is planning one. The briefing continued with logistics, radio frequencies, medevac protocols. Sarah absorbed it all while part of her mind calculated angles and distances from the map. Every ridge was a firing position. Every clearing was a kill zone. Every shadow could hide threats. This was how her father had thought, how Morrison had trained her to think. The world is a tactical problem waiting for mathematical solutions. Specialist Carlos Martinez, their medic, caught her eye and smiled. 27, the one who tried to lighten the mood when things got dark. Good hands for treating wounded, better instincts for reading when soldiers needed encouragement. Hey Mitchell, maybe today's the day. Maybe you'll actually shoot something. Private Tyler Brooks, the youngest at 21, laughed. $20 says she doesn't. 8 months, man. Whatever happened before, she's clearly over it. Rodriguez shut it down with a look. Brooks Martinez saved the commentary. Mitchell contributes plenty without shooting. Her navigation saved us 8 hours last month. Her intel assessments are consistently accurate. There's more to war than pulling triggers. But Sarah saw it in their eyes. The question, the doubt, the wondering if she could still do what her file claimed she'd done. Let them wonder. The convoy departed at 0700. 3 Humvees carrying 14 Rangers into terrain that made conventional warfare look simple. Ancient mountains that had swallowed armies for centuries. Valleys where empires went to die. The Hindu Kush didn't care about American technology or training. It just waited patient as geology for men to make mistakes. Sarah rode in the second vehicle with Harrison watching the landscape scroll past tinted windows, her mind already calculating. Processing terrain through the lens her father's journal had given her, refined by Morrison's brutal training regimen. Harrison broke the silence as they climbed into the mountains. Serious question, and you can tell me to shut up if you want, but you use old-school navigation techniques. No GPS, just map and compass and terrain reading. Why bushowing? Because GPS fails, gets jammed, runs out of batteries. My father's techniques don't require anything except understanding terrain and mathematics. Your father was military, Chom. Marine, Cold War-era sniper, made shots in Beirut that defined what was possible for his generation. What happened to him? Died in the barracks bombing, October 23, 1983. Same day he made his greatest shot. Saved 6 embassy personnel with a 1,200-meter engagement. Never knew if his sacrifice was worth it. Harrison absorbed that understanding more about Sarah's silence than he had before. For what it's worth, I think you're honoring his memory well. Sarah didn't respond. Talking about her father opened doors she kept locked. Behind those doors lived an 8-year-old girl who'd memorized 400 pages of ballistics calculations because it was all she had left of a man who'd promised to teach her to ride a bike and never came home. Cooper, sitting across from them, spoke quietly. Mitchell, I've been meaning to ask. Your file has redactions at levels I've never seen. We're about to walk into ambush country together. Is there anything we should know? She met his eyes, saw the genuine concern there, the practical question from a professional who understood that secrets could get people killed. I can shoot Cooper. When it matters, when there's no other option, I can make shots that solve problems. That's all you need to know. Fair enough. What she didn't say, 9 months ago in a different province with a different unit, she'd made a shot that saved 12 American hostages from Taliban execution. 1,847 meters through a sandstorm, moving target, bullet flight time of 3.4 seconds. Conditions that made the shot effectively impossible by every standard doctrine. She'd trusted the mathematics. The variables had aligned for exactly 2.8 seconds. She'd pulled the trigger. All 12 hostages survived. The Taliban commander dropped mid-sentence, never knowing what killed him, from over a mile away. The satellite footage leaked within 48 hours. CNN ran segments about the ghost sniper. Pakistan filed diplomatic complaints. Chinese military analysts claimed experimental ammunition. Russian ballistics experts published papers saying the shot violated known physics. Sarah Mitchell became too famous to use, too visible to hide, too controversial to deploy. Colonel Frank Morrison made sure of that. Her mentor, her surrogate father. The man who'd found a 19-year-old girl with her father's journal memorized and decided to turn natural talent into something that exceeded any sniper in American history. Morrison had leaked the footage deliberately, sacrificed both their careers to save Sarah from the black operations deployment Pentagon planners had designed for her. Political assassinations disguised as counterterrorism. Killing civilians marked as enemies by politicians who'd never see the faces Sarah would have to live with. Better buried alive in a conventional unit than becoming a government assassin. She understood that now. Didn't like it, but understood. The convoy reached the rally point at 0900. They dismounted into air that smelled like pine and ancient stone, into silence broken only by wind moving through valleys that had witnessed Soviet occupation, Mujahideen resistance, American intervention, and the endless cycle of violence that defined this landscape. Rodriguez organized them into patrol formation. Point element, main body rear security. Sarah and Harrison positioned for overwatch elevated positions to provide early warning and cover. Remember, Rodriguez said quietly, this is reconnaissance. We observe, we report. We don't start wars, just document when others are planning them. They moved into the mountains like professionals. Slow, deliberate, minimizing noise and signature. 14 rangers disappearing into vegetation so thick you could lose someone at 10 meters. Sarah and Harrison took position on a ridge overlooking the planned patrol route. This was her element. Patient observation, careful calculation of fields of fire, constant assessment of terrain that could shift from peaceful to lethal in seconds. Through her scope, she tracked the patrol's movement while simultaneously scanning beyond them, watching for unnatural patterns in vegetation, birds flushing from specific locations, light reflecting off metal or glass. The thousand small indicators that separated empty terrain from terrain concealing threats. Harrison settled beside her with his spotting scope covering different sectors. You know, I've been your spotter for 4 months. Never seen you actually engage a target. Starting to wonder if I'm qualified for a job I've never done. You'll know when the time comes. That's what worries me. Below them, the patrol moved through terrain that Sarah's instincts screamed was wrong. Not empty, not safe. Something about the patterns, the way vegetation had been disturbed. The thermal signatures she caught at the edge of her scope's range. Jake, you seeing anything at our 10 o'clock, about 1,400 meters? Harrison swung his scope, searched, found nothing. Negative. What did you see? Maybe nothing, maybe thermal shimmer, maybe professional counter-surveillance. Should we report it? Sarah considered. Reporting drew attention, required explaining how she'd spotted something at 1,400 meters that experienced spotters missed. But Rangers' lives potentially depended on accurate intelligence. Not yet. Keep watching that sector. The patrol continued for 90 minutes without incident, covering 4 kilometers of difficult terrain, documenting old Soviet fighting positions, abandoned equipment evidence that these mountains had seen combat before and would again. Rodriguez kept them moving with hand signals and quiet professionalism. Cooper maintained rear security with the vigilance of someone who'd survived by assuming every shadow hid threats. Martinez stayed central, ready to respond to casualties that hopefully wouldn't come. Brooks moved with the nervous energy of youth still learning that survival meant patience over aggression. Then at 09:47, everything changed. Rodriguez's hand signal, halt, followed immediately by the signal every soldier dreaded, enemy contact. Through her scope, Sarah saw what had triggered Rodriguez's alert. Movement in the tree line, 450 meters north. Not 1 or 2 fighters. Multiple figures moving with military precision. Coordinated. Professional. Contact north, she murmured into her radio voice, calm despite adrenaline beginning to spike. Multiple combatants, estimate platoon strength, moving to flank our position. Rodriguez responded immediately. Copy Mitchell, maintain observation. All elements prepare to displace on my command. But before anyone could move, the mountains exploded into violence. The ambush was textbook perfect. 3 elements attacking simultaneously. Northern group pinning attention with automatic weapons fire. Southern element cutting off retreat routes. Eastern ridge establishing crew-served weapons positions. 50 enemy fighters against 14 rangers. Professional contractors, not Taliban insurgents. Russian weapons. Coordinated communications. Military training that showed in every movement. This wasn't random contact. This was planned, executed, designed to kill every American in that valley. Automatic weapons fire tore through vegetation. Rounds snapped past positions, thudded into trees, kicked up dirt and rock fragments. The Rangers returned fire instantly, training overriding fear, even as they realized how badly the mathematics had turned against them. Contact front, contact rear. We're surrounded, someone shouted over the radio voice, fighting to be heard over the chaos of combat that had erupted in seconds. Sarah watched through her scope with the detachment her father had described in his journal. Emotional distance enabling precision. She saw the complete tactical picture with terrible clarity. Rangers pinned in a natural depression, limited cover, enemy forces converging from 3 directions. The mathematics calculating toward a very bad conclusion very fast. Rodriguez's voice cracked through the radio, stress evident despite years of professionalism. Mitchell, I need suppressive fire on that northern element. Now they're about to overrun Martinez's position. Harrison was already ranging targets, fingers moving over his scope's calculations. 450 meters, multiple movers in heavy cover wind, left to right at 12 miles per hour, we can engage. No, Sarah said quietly. What? Northern element is a feint. I'm not leaving my scope. The real threat is on that ridge at 1,200 meters. They're setting up a PKM machine gun that will have clear fields of fire over our entire team. Once operational, everyone down there dies. Harrison swung his spotting scope toward her indicated position. Several seconds passed before he found it. When he did, his voice changed, fear creeping in despite training. Jesus, you're right. They're setting up crew-served weapon-perfect position, but Mitchell, that's 1,200 meters. Through mountain thermals, moving targets. That's impossible, Sarah finished. 5 impossible shots. Machine gunner, assistant gunner, loader, ammo bearer, squad leader directing the setup. Miss anyone, they go operational and kill everyone I'm supposed to protect. The forest had become hell. Grenades detonating among ranger positions. Martinez screaming over radio about wounded. Cooper reporting they were low on ammunition. Brooks certain they were all going to die in this valley that had swallowed so many soldiers before them. Mitchell, I'm serious, Harrison said, real fear in his voice now. 1,200 meters through concealment, moving targets, combat stress. Even the best sniper alive couldn't. Sarah removed her magazine. Checked the chamber. Reloaded with movements her hands had performed 10,000 times. Perfect muscle memory built through a decade of Morrison's brutal training regimen. I am the best sniper alive, she said quietly. That's exactly why they buried me here. To hide what I can do. To keep me invisible. To make everyone forget that sometimes one person with the right skills at the right moment can make impossible shots look routine. She settled behind her scope. Her breathing slowed to that perfect rhythm her father had described. The pause between heartbeats where the world steadied and mathematics became the only truth that mattered. My father made 1,200-meter shots in Beirut with worse equipment and saved 6 people on the last day of his life. Colonel Morrison spent 10 years training me to exceed anything my father accomplished. Every day, for a decade, 6 days a week, thousands of hours on ranges, learning to trust mathematics when fear screams to run. Her finger found the trigger. The XM110's semi-automatic capability meant she could fire rapidly. Most snipers would shoot, assess, correct, shoot again. Methodical, safe. Sarah didn't have time for methodical. The PKM crew would be operational in 90 seconds. Once that machine gun started firing, 14 Rangers would die in the valley below. Mathematics that simple, that brutal. Hawk Morrison once told me, they'll fear your excellence, Sarah. They'll try to bury it, hide it, make it disappear. But someday someone will need the impossible. When that moment comes, don't hesitate. Trust the mathematics. Trust yourself. Pull the trigger. Below, Rangers dying. Martinez treating wounds that would be fatal without medevac. Rodriguez organizing a defense that couldn't hold against 50 professional contractors with elevated positions and crew-served weapons. Sarah's reticle settled on the first target 1,200 meters away. Machine gunner settling behind his weapon. Moving with confidence because nobody could touch him from this range. Nobody could make a shot through mountain thermals at a distance where most snipers couldn't even see targets clearly. Nobody except the woman they'd buried, the ghost they'd tried to make disappear. Today is that day, Jake, Sarah whispered. Spot my corrections, call the wind, trust the mathematics. We're ending this. Harrison's training overrode his fear. His voice steadied, professional. Wind 12 miles per hour, gusting to 15 left to right. Temperature 62 degrees. Humidity 35%. Range 1,200 meters. You're clear to engage. Sarah's world narrowed to mathematics and violence, the variables her father had taught her. The precision Morrison had demanded. The shots that would determine if 14 Americans lived or died in the next 3 minutes. Her finger began compressing the trigger. Smooth, steady, the way Morrison had taught her, the way her father's journal described. The technique passed down through generations of men and women who understood that sometimes excellence was the only thing standing between civilization and chaos. The first shot would break in seconds, change everything, reveal what she'd been hiding for 8 months, end her anonymity. probably end her career. But save her Rangers. Mathematics didn't care about careers. Neither did Sarah Mitchell. The trigger broke clean and thunder rolled across the Hindu Kush Mountains. The first shot broke like judgment. Thunder rolling across mountains that had heard gunfire for decades but never quite like this. The XM-110 cycled automatically, brass ejecting in a golden arc that caught morning sunlight, the rifle chambering a fresh round while the first bullet was still in flight. Sarah fired again before the first shot impacted. Then a third time, fourth, fifth, 5 shots in 2.8 seconds, each with minute adjustments for wind that shifted between rounds, elevation that changed as targets moved, mathematical calculations her conscious mind couldn't process but her body executed perfectly. 10 years of Morrison's training compressed into 3 seconds of violence that would rewrite what people believed possible. Through her scope, she watched results in the compressed time dilation that combat creates, where seconds stretch and everything happens simultaneously and in perfect sequence. The first round covered 1,200 meters in 1.4 seconds, passed through air molecules that pushed and pulled according to Coriolis effect and wind drift and 1,000 variables Sarah's father had documented in his journal. Dropped 18 feet from bore line to compensate for gravity and distance. Drifted 2.8 inches right for wind and planetary rotation. The machine gunner was settling behind his PKM hands, positioning the weapon for maximum field of fire when the bullet found him center mass. He dropped instantly, body going slack, never understanding what killed him, from a range he'd been taught was safe. His assistant gunner looked up, confused instincts, screaming danger but not comprehending the threat. The second round caught him at the base of his neck, spun him away from the weapon. Permanent. The loader reached for the ammunition belt, movement's automatic trained responses to unexpected combat. Sarah had anticipated exactly where he'd move. Third shot punched through his chest. He collapsed across the PKM he'd been preparing to feed. Fourth shot, the ammo bearer was diving for cover, survival instincts, finally overriding training, understanding they were taking precision fire from impossible distance. But Sarah had calculated his movement pattern before he moved. The round found him mid-stride. End of threat. The squad leader directing the setup had the best instincts. Started moving the instant his gunner dropped, weapon rising, eyes scanning for the sniper he knew was killing his team. But Sarah had saved him for last deliberately. Let him watch his crew die. Let him understand what was happening before it happened to him. Fifth shot dropped him before he'd moved 3 meters. The final round, she didn't aim at personnel. She put it through the PKM itself. The bullet impacted the receiver assembly and turned precision Russian engineering into scrap metal. Even if someone else tried manning that weapon, it would never fire again. 5 targets at 1,200 meters through mountain thermals and shifting wind. 5 shots, 5 hits, 2.8 seconds. The forest went silent for exactly 1 heartbeat. Even the professional contractors executing the ambush seemed confused. Their most dangerous asset, the crew-served weapon that would have ended the Rangers in seconds, eliminated by an invisible threat from a distance that shouldn't have been possible. Harrison stared at Sarah like she'd just performed surgery on reality itself. Holy Christ, how did you? Questions later, Sarah interrupted, already acquiring Nexo's targets. Her voice was calm, professional, emotionless in the way that enabled precision under stress that would break most shooters. Right now, we finished saving my Rangers. She transitioned to the northern element. 18 fighters at 450 meters, moving to overrun the Ranger positions. Compared to 1,200 meters, this was trivially easy, almost insulting to her capabilities. Her rifle spoke with mechanical rhythm, semi-automatic fire allowing engagement of multiple targets faster than they could react. Each shot placed with surgical precision. Not just hitting targets, hitting them to maximize psychological impact. Leaders first, the men others oriented toward whose commands kept the attack coordinated. She dropped 3 in 6 seconds, watched through her scope as the assault element lost cohesion without leadership. Then crew-served weapon operators, men carrying the RPMs of machine guns that made them dangerous. Selective shots that removed heavy firepower and left survivors questioning whether continuing the attack was worth dying. Then anyone trying to rally others, anyone attempting to restore organization, anyone brave enough or stupid enough to stand and direct fire when an invisible sniper was systematically dismantling their force. Harrison called observations, his voice carrying a mix of professional assessment and barely controlled awe. Target down. Another down. They're breaking formation. Eastern group is pulling back. Western element taking defensive positions. Down in the valley, Rodriguez realized what was happening, understood that someone was engaging the enemy from extreme range with accuracy that defied standard doctrine. His voice cracked over the radio, stress giving way to aggressive confidence. Unknown shooter is engaging enemy positions. All elements press the attack. Drive them back. The Rangers counterattacked with renewed fury. Professional soldiers who'd been facing certain death suddenly given a lifeline by precision fire from a source they couldn't see. They moved with the violence and coordination that made American infantry feared across every battlefield. Cooper led the Southern Element's counterattack, his tactical discipline turning defense into offense. Martinez treated wounded while simultaneously calling targets. Brooks, who doubted Sarah's capabilities hours ago, fought with the desperate energy of someone who'd just been given a second chance at survival. 800 meters south, in a position carefully chosen for command and control, Alexei Volkov watched through high-powered optics. 55 years old, former Soviet Spetsnaz veteran of the Afghan War in the 1980s, when he'd been a young sniper learning his craft in these same mountains. His radio operator reported with professional calm, despite obvious stress. Sir PKM crew eliminated. 5 targets, 1 shooter under 3 seconds. Northern element taking casualties. Western element requesting permission to withdraw. Volkov's weathered face showed an emotion rare for a man who'd spent 3 decades in violence, genuine respect. Remarkable, he said in Russian. In 1985, I made a 4-shot sequence at 900 meters. Thought it was the pinnacle of what human capability allowed. She just exceeded that by 300 meters in 1 additional target. His subordinate, younger and less experienced, didn't understand. Orders, sir, we're losing men. The ambush is failing. We're losing men because that's what we're being paid to lose. Continue the assault. I need to see her full capabilities. Sir, with respect, this is becoming a massacre. This is becoming a measurement. Volkov's voice carried the authority of a man who'd survived the Soviet collapse and built a career in the ruins. The client paid $5 million for confirmation that Sarah Mitchell remains operational at legendary levels. She's providing that proof. Our casualties are expensive but acceptable. Continue pressure on the American position. He returned to his optics, watching Sarah work. Professional interest overriding concern for his own people. This was business, cold, calculated. And he was witnessing something that redefined his understanding of what human skill could achieve. When I was Spetsnaz in these mountains, he said quietly, we thought we were the best. Thought Soviet training produced snipers without equal. Watching her dismantle 50 contractors like their targets on a range, perhaps the Americans finally produced someone worthy of respect. Sarah had transitioned to the Western element. 18 fighters at 650 meters, taking cover behind a natural berm, their commander attempting to restore order and maintain offensive pressure. Through her scope, she studied the commander. Chechen veteran, judging by his movements. Professional, competent, brave. The kind of man who'd survived wars through skill and caution. She could kill him instantly. 1 shot, simple mathematics, remove the leader and watch the unit collapse. Instead, she made a different choice. Her first shot hit the ground directly in front of him. Dirt and rock fragments exploded into his face, made him flinch and dive for better cover. Second shot closer, near enough that he felt the pressure wave of the bullet's passage. Third shot passed centimeters from his position. The supersonic crack so close he'd hear it through his skull, feel it in his teeth, understand exactly how close to death he'd just come. Harrison watched confused. Mitchell, you had him. Clean shot. Why, calm. Dead commander is a martyr, Sarah said quietly, her scope already tracking the commander's panicked movement. Living commander who ran teaches their force that fighting us is a death sentence. Right now, I'm giving him a choice: flee and live, or stay and die. The message was received. The Chechen commander broke, abandoned his position. His fighters followed survival instincts, overriding training and contracts and whatever had brought them to this valley. By 10:06, 19 minutes after first contact, the engagement was over. 50 professional military contractors reduced to scattered survivors fleeing through mountains, leaving behind dead wounded in the wreckage of an ambush that should have been perfect. The Rangers held the battlefield. 0 KIA. Multiple wounded, but Martinez was already stabilizing them with the competent hands of a medic who'd practiced his craft under fire too many times. Rodriguez organized a defensive perimeter and casualty collection point, his movements showing 15 years of leadership experience. Cooper established security on likely approach routes. Brooks helped Martinez with the wounded, his earlier skepticism about Sarah replaced by something approaching awe. Harrison sat back from his spotting scope, hands shaking slightly with adrenaline come down. 23 shots. I counted. 450 to 1,200 meters. Moving targets through mountain thermals. Combat stress. He turned to look at Sarah directly. Did you miss any of them? Sarah saved her weapon movements methodical and precise. No, one word. 23 shots. 23 hits. Perfect accuracy at distances most snipers couldn't even range accurately. Martinez approached once his casualties were stable blood on his hands from treating wounds, gratitude on his face. 4 of my wounded would be KIA without you breaking that ambush, Mitchell. That machine gun position would have torn us apart. Thank you. Cooper came next. 32 years old, 12 years of combat experience, eyes that had seen most of what war offered. That Eastern Ridge position, I never even saw it. Combat veterans supposedly experienced, and I missed the threat that would have killed all of us. You identified it instantly and eliminated it from 1,200 meters. His voice carried respect and something else. The recognition that he'd fundamentally misunderstood who Sarah Mitchell was. Brooks approached last. 21 years old, cocky certainty replaced by humility. Staff Sergeant Mitchell, I owe you an apology. I thought you were dead weight. Thought you'd lost your nerve or couldn't hack it. I was wrong. He held up a spent brass casing he'd collected. I counted your shots. Watched the enemy drop. You weren't just shooting, you were conducting a symphony of violence. Every shot perfect. Every target exactly the one that needed eliminating next. Sarah accepted their gratitude with the same professional distance she maintained for everything. I did my job. Shooting is one tool. Today it was the right tool. Tomorrow it might be navigation or intelligence assessment. Doesn't matter which tool, as long as Rangers come home alive. But inside, behind the emotionless facade Morrison had trained her to maintain, something had shifted. 8 months of invisibility had ended. The ghost had revealed herself, and there would be consequences for that revelation. Rodriguez's voice cracked over the radio. Mitchell Harrison link up with main body, were consolidating position and calling for medevac. They broke down their position with practiced efficiency. Sarah policed her brass-collected evidence of the shooting that would be analyzed by ballistics experts and intelligence officers who'd want to understand how one sniper had broken a professional ambush. The walk down from the ridge took 12 minutes, every step bringing Sarah closer to the moment when she'd have to face questions she didn't want to answer, when invisibility would be replaced by scrutiny. The Rangers looked at her differently now. Before the quiet one who never shot, the specialist with a mysteriously redacted file, the sniper who'd gone 8 months without firing in combat. Now something dangerous they didn't fully understand. Respected, maybe feared, definitely reassessed. Martinez had stabilized all 4 wounded Rangers. Serious injuries but survivable with proper treatment. He looked up as Sarah approached. Without you, I'd be calling body bags instead of medevac. You gave me wounded I could treat instead of corpses I could only document. Cooper studied her with new understanding. That shot on the machine gun crew. You called it before they were even set up. How did you know that's where they'd position their heavy weapon? Terrain analysis. If I were setting up killing field in this valley, that's where I'd place crew-served weapon. Maximum coverage, protected position, clear fields of fire. They thought like I think, so I knew where to look. Rodriguez approached his expression carefully neutral. Hell of a performance, Mitchell. Want to tell me who you really are? Same person I was yesterday, Sergeant. Designated marksman, doing her job. Designated marksmen don't make 5 impossible shots in 3 seconds at 1,200 meters. That's not training, that's something else entirely. Sarah met his eyes, saw respect there. Also questions, concerns. The awareness that she'd been hiding capabilities that could have been useful but might also be dangerous. I'm a soldier who was trained very well by someone who believed in excellence. Today my Rangers needed that excellence. I provided it. That's all. Rodriguez held her gaze for a long moment, then nodded. Fair enough. For what it's worth, I'm glad you were on our side today. The medevac helicopters arrived within 20 minutes. Along with them came 3 additional helicopters that Sarah recognized immediately. Unmarked. No visible unit designations. The kind of aircraft that carried people who didn't officially exist doing work that wasn't officially sanctioned. Intelligence assets. Probably CIA. Maybe DIA. Definitely people who'd been monitoring the situation and recognized Sarah's name when after-action reports started flowing up the chain of command. The landing zone became organized chaos. Wounded being loaded for transport. Evidence collection teams photographing the battlefield. Intelligence officers retrieving weapons and equipment from enemy casualties. Rangers giving initial statements about what happened. And through it all, Sarah noticed the way certain individuals watched her. Professional assessment. Calculating. Already planning how to use or bury what she just revealed. Captain Hayes appeared from one of the unmarked helicopters, her expression tight. Mitchell with me. Now. They walked to an isolated area where conversation wouldn't be overheard. Hayes turned and Sarah saw stress in her commander's face. I've got Pentagon on encrypted line demanding your immediate transfer. CIA wants you extracted for debriefing. State Department is asking questions about classified operations. And I've got foreign intelligence services somehow knowing your name and filing inquiries with NATO liaison. Sarah kept her expression neutral. I made shots defending American soldiers, ma'am. That's my job. You made shots that we spent 9 months making the world forget about. The ghost sniper was supposed to be buried. Career ended, capabilities neutralized. Instead, you just performed an even more impressive demonstration than Afghanistan. Hayes paused, choosing words carefully. Help me understand. 8 months of 0 combat engagements. Then today, 23 perfect shots under impossible conditions. Why hide it until now? Because my Rangers didn't need it until now. The mission was the mission. Today, the mission required shooting. So I shot. And tomorrow, when this hits intelligence networks and foreign analysts start asking how one American sniper broke a professional ambush, when hostile nations question whether we've developed new weapons or training techniques, when politicians demand explanations for capabilities that aren't supposed to exist. Sarah understood the real question. Was the political cost worth the tactical benefit? Would saving 14 Rangers justify the diplomatic complications her actions would create? Tomorrow doesn't matter if my Rangers are dead today. Ma'am, I made the only choice I could live with. Hayes studied her, then nodded slowly. For what it's worth, Mitchell, I agree. But agreeing doesn't make the fallout go away. Get on that helicopter. We're segregating you from the team until higher command decides what to do with you. The flight to Bagram Airfield took 40 minutes. Sarah spent it watching the Hindu Kush Mountains scroll past, thinking about her father's journal and Morrison's sacrifice and the price of excellence in a world that feared exceptional capability. At Bagram, she was directed to an isolated holding room. Not a cell, not officially detention, but clearly separation from normal soldiers. Protection or quarantine depending on perspective. She waited 3 hours before Captain Hayes returned with Lieutenant Colonel Winters. The battalion commander looked like he'd aged 5 years in the past 6 hours. Staff Sergeant Mitchell, he began formally, we need to discuss what happened today. Yes, sir. I'm ordering an after-action review, full tactical debrief, but before that happens officially, I need to understand something. He paused. Your file has more redactions than readable text. What I can read suggests capabilities consistent with what Rodriguez reported, but confirmation from you would be helpful. Sarah chose words carefully. I was trained by Colonel Frank Morrison for 10 years. He was Gulf War sniper instructor, Cold War operations veteran. He believed in pushing human capability to absolute limits through discipline and mathematics. I was a dedicated student. Today I applied that training to protect American soldiers. Winters absorbed that. The Afghanistan incident. 1847-meter, shot through sandstorm. That was you. Yes, sir. And today's performance. 5 targets at 1,200 meters in under 3 seconds. That matches the classified assessments I've been allowed to read about you. Yes, sir. So for 8 months, you've been hiding capabilities that could have been tactically useful. Why? Because Pentagon ordered me to, sir. After Afghanistan, I was told to disappear. Blend in, never shoot like that again. I followed orders until following orders meant watching my Rangers die. At that point, orders became secondary to mission. Winters studied her for a long moment. If I asked you to make those shots again, could you? Depends on the situation, sir. I don't perform tricks on command. But if Rangers need protection and mathematics says shots are possible, yes, I could make them again. Even knowing the political cost, the diplomatic complications, the way foreign intelligence services will analyze and question and pressure, even knowing all that, sir, because politics don't matter to the Rangers who'd be dead if I hadn't shot. 14 Americans came home alive today. That's worth any political cost. Winters nodded slowly. Dismiss, Staff Sergeant. Get food and rest. The formal debrief starts at 1800. Sarah was escorted to transient barracks, given a meal she barely tasted, and left alone with her thoughts for 3 hours. She tried calling Morrison but couldn't get connection. Probably intentional. Probably someone had flagged her communications for monitoring. At 1800, she was brought to a secured briefing room that contained more rank and authority than she'd seen assembled in one place since Afghanistan. Lieutenant Colonel Winters presided. But the room also contained Captain Hayes, 2 officers from Defense Intelligence Agency, a CIA case officer, a State Department representative, and a NATO liaison who looked distinctly uncomfortable. Rodriguez was called first. He presented the tactical situation with professional precision, described the ambush, the casualties being treated the moment he'd ordered Sarah to provide suppressive fire. Staff Sergeant Mitchell reported that the northern element was a feint. She identified the primary threat as an enemy crew-served weapon position at 1,200 meters on the eastern ridge. I questioned the assessment initially, but she was correct. The DIA officer interrupted. What happened next? Mitchell engaged. 5 targets eliminated in approximately 3 seconds. Machine gun crew completely neutralized before they could fire a single round. The State Department representative leaned forward. Can you be more specific about the engagement distances and accuracy? 1,200 meters, 5 targets, 5 hits, under 3 seconds. Moving targets through mountain thermals with variable wind conditions. Silence in the room. Then the CIA officer spoke. That matches classified performance metrics we have from Mitchell's previous unit. Same shooter, same impossible accuracy. The State Department rep's expression tightened, which is exactly the problem. We spent 9 months making the world forget about the ghost sniper. Now she's performed an even more impressive demonstration. Russian military bloggers are already analyzing the engagement. Chinese intelligence services are requesting information through back channels. Pakistan is filing complaints about special operations in their region of influence. Winters cut in. With respect, this wasn't special operations. This was a standard reconnaissance patrol that encountered hostile forces. Mitchell defended American soldiers using skills she possesses. Since when do we apologize for our troops being competent? Since competence at this level raises questions about whether we've developed experimental training techniques or equipment that violates international protocols. The debate continued for 20 minutes before Sarah was called to testify. She entered to find every eye in the room locked on her. Winters gestured to a chair. Staff Sergeant Mitchell, please describe the engagement from your perspective. She did, clinically, professionally, without emotion or embellishment. Described identifying the machine gun position, calculating the shots, executing the engagement, and systematically eliminating threats until the ambush broke. The DIA officer had technical questions. What were the environmental conditions? Wind speed, temperature, humidity. Sarah provided exact figures from memory. The officer compared them to meteorological data and nodded confirmation. The CIA case officer asked about her training. Who taught you to make shots at these distances? Colonel Frank Morrison, 10 years of daily instruction. He's retired now, but he was Gulf War sniper instructor, and Cold War operations veteran. And the methodology, how do you calculate these shots most? Mathematics, ballistics, environmental assessment. My father left me his field journal from Beirut operations, 400 pages of calculations and observations. I memorized it by age 12. Colonel Morrison built on that foundation with a decade of intensive training. The result is what you saw today. The questions continued for 90 minutes. Each answer carefully constructed to be truthful without revealing anything that wasn't already documented. Sarah had learned in Afghanistan that the more you explained, the more questions they asked. Better to provide minimum necessary information and let them draw their own conclusions. Finally, Winters dismissed everyone except Sarah and the command staff. "This is the situation," he said bluntly. "Pentagon wants you in a supply depot. CIA wants you for black operations. State Department wants you discharged to prevent international incidents. And I've got a responsibility to my battalion that includes utilizing capable soldiers effectively." He paused. "But before we decide anything, I need you to talk to someone." A video screen activated. Colonel Frank Morrison's face appeared. 68 years old, retirement showing in the lines around his eyes, but voice still carrying the authority that had shaped Sarah's entire adult life. "Sarah, Hawk, saw the intelligence reports. You did it again. Exceeded even what I thought possible. Had no choice. My Rangers needed protection. I know. That's exactly why I trained you. Not for glory or politics. For moments when mathematics becomes the difference between life and death." He paused. "But I need to tell you something. About Afghanistan, about how the footage leaked." Sarah felt her stomach drop. "Hawk, it wasn't an accident. I leaked it. Deliberately." The room went silent. Every officer staring at the screen. Morrison continued, his voice carrying pain and conviction equally. "Pentagon was planning a deployment. Black operations. Using you to eliminate targets they classified as terrorists, but were actually civilians. Politicians, journalists, people who opposed American policy. Political assassinations disguised as counterterrorism." His eyes held Sarah's through the screen. "When I learned what they intended, I knew the only way to save you was to make you too visible, too controversial, too famous to use for black operations. So I leaked the Afghanistan footage. Made you go viral, created diplomatic incidents, forced Pentagon to bury you. You sacrificed both our careers. I sacrificed our careers to save your soul." Morrison's voice broke slightly. "Your father didn't die in Beirut saving innocent people so his daughter could become a government assassin killing civilians. Robert Mitchell's ghost would never forgive me if I let them corrupt what you are." Sarah felt tears threatening, but maintained control. "I could never hate you for that, Hawk." "Good, because today proved I made the right choice. You used your gifts to protect, not to serve political agendas. That's what your father would have wanted, what I trained you for." He paused. "But Sarah, someone orchestrated that ambush specifically to expose you. Someone powerful, well-funded, with access to classified intelligence. This isn't over." The screen went dark. Winters broke the silence. "Well, that explains some of the file redactions." The CIA officer looked thoughtful. "If Morrison is correct about Pentagon's original intentions, and his leak prevented those operations, that changes the political calculus significantly." The State Department rep wasn't convinced. "It doesn't change the fact that Mitchell is now visible again. Foreign intelligence services are asking questions we can't answer without revealing capabilities we'd prefer to keep classified." Captain Hayes spoke for the first time in the meeting. "Then here's what I propose. Mitchell stays with this battalion. We assign her as sniper section leader. She trains designated marksmen, develops long-range reconnaissance capabilities, shares expertise with the next generation. She stays partially visible, partially useful, not buried, but not operational in ways that create diplomatic incidents." Winters considered that. "It's a compromise. Pentagon gets to claim oversight. CIA doesn't get another black operations asset they don't need. State gets reduced visibility. And I get to keep a highly capable soldier serving in appropriate capacity." He looked at Sarah. "Can you work with that arrangement?" "Yes, sir. Training the next generation is exactly what Colonel Morrison would want me doing." "Good. Because between you and me, Mitchell having someone with your capabilities in my battalion helps me sleep better at night. Just try not to break physics too obviously when people are watching." Sarah almost smiled. "I'll do my best, sir." The meeting concluded with administrative details and security protocols. Sarah was released with orders to report to battalion headquarters the following morning to begin establishing the sniper section. She found her way to a quiet area outside the Tactical Operations Center. Night had fallen over Bagram, stars visible through the thin mountain air, the same stars her father had seen from Beirut. the same sky Morrison had watched during Gulf War operations. Her phone showed a message from Harrison. The guys want to know if you're okay. Also, we're calling you Ghost now. Seemed appropriate. She typed back, I'm fine, and that's not my name. But she knew the nickname would stick. Some things you couldn't control, like excellence that refused to stay hidden, like capabilities that revealed themselves when stakes demanded it, like being the daughter of Robert Mitchell and the student of Frank Morrison and carrying 42 years of legacy in the mathematics of impossible shots. Tomorrow she'd start training the next generation, passing on what her father had started and Morrison had refined and she had proven in mountains that had witnessed empires rise and fall. Tonight she just sat under stars that didn't care about politics or diplomacy or the complicated mathematics of being excellent in a world that feared excellence. Mathematics. That's what mattered. Numbers that didn't lie. Variables that aligned when they aligned regardless of human convenience. Physics that operated on principles more fundamental than politics. Her father had understood that. Morrison had taught it. Today she'd proven it. Tomorrow she'd ensure the next generation understood it too. The mathematics of impossible becoming inevitable. That was the legacy. That was the mission. And Sarah Mitchell would carry it forward one shot at a time, one student at a time, until the day came when someone trained by her exceeded what she'd accomplished. That would be victory, not the shots she'd made, but the shots others would make because she'd taught them how. Legacy measured in lives saved by people who learned that impossible was just mathematics waiting to be understood. 4 weeks after the Hindu Kush ambush, Sarah Mitchell stood on a mountain range watching 12 designated marksmen practice fundamentals that most would never master. The Afghan sun painted the landscape in shades her father had described. Amber light on ancient stone, shadows that held secrets older than nations. Harrison had transferred to the sniper section immediately. Brooks, the youngest ranger, who doubted her capabilities, had requested assignment within days of returning from that valley. 10 others had volunteered, drawn by the legend that Sarah had become whether she wanted it or not. The Ghost. The woman who'd made impossible shots look routine. She was teaching Morrison's methodology. Not tricks or shortcuts. Mathematics. Discipline. The understanding that excellence came from 10,000 hours of practice, not from natural talent. Impossible shots are only impossible until you understand the variables, she told them. Her voice carried across the range with the same flat professionalism that had made people think she lacked personality. Mathematics doesn't care about your doubt. Physics operates on principles that existed before humans and will exist after. Your job is to understand those principles and apply them perfectly. She demonstrated at 950 meters, wind shifting unpredictably, temperature climbing as morning gave way to midday heat. She calculated, adjusted, fired. The target disappeared. Again, a rhythm of precision that made theory become observable reality. The younger soldiers watched with expressions mixing respect and disbelief. They'd heard stories, seen after-action reports. But watching her work was different. This wasn't combat adrenaline or lucky shooting. This was mastery demonstrated with the casual confidence that comes from a decade of brutal training. Private First Class David Torres, 22 years old, raised a question that showed he was thinking beyond mechanics. Staff Sergeant, how do you calculate so fast? We need ballistic computers for those numbers, and you're just looking at grass movement and doing it in your head. Sarah held up her father's journal, worn leather cover, 400 pages of handwritten calculations and observations. 42 years old and still more useful than most modern technology. My father's Cold War-era notebook, Captain Robert Mitchell, Marine, Sniper, Beirut, Operations, 1983. No computers, just mathematics, wine tables, ballistic charts he calculated by hand using a slide rule. I memorized this by age 12. Colonel Morrison taught me to trust numbers over technology. She opened to a random page. Her father's handwriting. Precise, methodical. The words of a man who understood that other people's lives depended on his calculations being perfect. See, this father calculated 1,200-meter engagement in Beirut using observation and basic mathematics. Saved 6 embassy personnel. Technology changes every decade. Mathematics doesn't. Wind is still wind. Gravity still drops bullets according to predictable formulas. Temperature still affects air density. Learn the fundamentals and you'll never need batteries. Brooks spoke up, his earlier skepticism replaced by genuine curiosity. What happened to your father, Staff Sergeant? Died in the Beirut barracks bombing, October 23, 1983. Same day he made his greatest shot. He saved people that morning with a 1,200-meter engagement, then died that afternoon when the truck bomb hit. Never knew if his sacrifice was worth it. The range went quiet. These were young men who understood sacrifice in abstract terms. Sarah had just made it concrete, personal, a reminder that excellence sometimes carried a price measured in more than time and effort. Harrison broke the moment with practical observation. Incoming helicopter, looks like command staff. Sarah turned to watch the aircraft approach. UH-60 Black Hawk standard transport, but something about the deliberate approach suggested this wasn't routine. It landed 50 meters from the range rotor wash, kicking up dust that made shooters shield their eyes. The passenger who emerged made Sarah's breath catch. Colonel Frank Morrison, 68 years old. Retirement had aged him visibly, more gray in his hair, lines deeper around his eyes. But his movements still carried the precision of a man who'd spent 40 years in profession where sloppiness killed people. He wore civilian clothes with a temporary instructor badge. Pentagon had granted him credentials. Probably Winter's doing. Probably recognizing that the man who'd trained the ghost had knowledge worth accessing. Sarah met him halfway to the helicopter. They didn't embrace. Wasn't Morrison's style. But the way he gripped her shoulder communicated more than words. Hawk. What are you doing here? Winters called. Said you needed help training the next generation. Figured an old dog might teach tricks that computers can't. His eyes scanned the range setup, the students of the equipment. Professional assessment. You've built something good here. I'm trying to pass on what you taught me. No, you're building something better than what I taught you. That's how it should work, each generation exceeding the previous. Morrison turned to address the assembled students. His voice carried the authority that had shaped Sarah and dozens of snipers before her, the kind of presence that made young soldiers straighten their posture and pay attention. I'm Colonel Frank Morrison, Gulf War sniper instructor, Cold War operations veteran. Grenada, Panama, places some of you are too young to remember. I trained Staff Sergeant Mitchell for 10 years, taught her everything she knows. He paused deliberately. Not everything I know, mind you. She exceeded that years ago. What you saw in the Hindu Kush, those 23 perfect shots, that's not talent. That's discipline. 10 years of daily training, thousands of hours on ranges, learning to trust mathematics when fear says run. The students listened with the attention soldiers gave to men who'd earned credibility through decades of service. Morrison wasn't selling them anything. He was stating facts with the confidence that came from having lived them. Over the next 3 hours, Morrison taught Cold War techniques that predated modern technology. Natural navigation using terrain features and celestial references. Wind reading by observing vegetation movement and thermal patterns. Range estimation through angular measurements in known object sizes. Torres, the young soldier who'd asked about calculations, showed polite skepticism. Sir, with respect, we have laser rangefinders and ballistic computers now. Aren't these techniques outdated? Morrison's expression didn't change. What happens when your rangefinder's battery dies? When your ballistic computer gets damaged by shrapnel or immersed in water? When enemy jamming disrupts your electronics? He gestured to Sarah. Demonstrate, Staff Sergeant. No technology, just fundamentals. Sarah estimated range to a target using the mil-dot reticle in her scope and known average human height. Calculated wind by watching grass movement at multiple distances. Adjusted for temperature she felt on her skin and altitude she knew from terrain study. Fired without touching a single piece of electronic equipment. Perfect hit at 850 meters. Technology is a tool, Morrison said quietly, not a crutch. Real skill survives equipment failure. The Soviet snipers I faced in Cold War proxy conflicts didn't have fancy computers. They had mathematics and discipline. Some of them were better shots than Americans with superior equipment, because fundamentals beat technology when fundamentals are mastered. Brooks asked the question Sarah knew was coming. Staff Sergeant Mitchell, I owe you an apology. 4 weeks ago, I thought you were dead weight. Called you that to your face. Turns out you're probably the most dangerous person in this battalion. I'm sorry. Sarah met his eyes. Not dangerous. Prepared. There's a difference. Dangerous suggests unpredictable or reckless. Prepared means when the moment comes that requires excellence, you're ready. I wasn't more dangerous 4 weeks ago than I was 4 months ago. The situation just finally required what I'd prepared to provide. Morrison nodded approval. That distinction mattered. Excellence wasn't about being better than others for ego's sake. It was about being ready for moments when only excellence would save lives. As evening approached, Sarah and Morrison found themselves alone on the range, watching sunset paint the Hindu Kush in shades of amber and shadow. The same colors from Beirut. The same light her father had seen on the last day of his life. Your father would be proud, Morrison said quietly. You've surpassed anything he accomplished. Because you taught me to. His journal gave me foundation. You gave me mastery. I gave you nothing you didn't earn through work. 10 years, 6 days a week, thousands of hours on ranges in every weather condition. That's why you're exceptional. Not because of some gift, because you worked harder than anyone I have ever trained. Silence stretched between them. Comfortable. The silence of two people who'd shared enough that words weren't always necessary. Sarah broke it with the question she'd been carrying. That footage you leaked from Afghanistan, sacrificing both our careers, was it worth it? Morrison didn't hesitate. Every day. Because instead of being a government assassin killing civilians for political convenience, you're here training the next generation to protect American lives. Yes, worth it. But your retirement, the pension complications, the way Pentagon buried you, are irrelevant compared to keeping you clean. Your father died saving innocent people. I wasn't going to let his daughter become something he'd be ashamed of. Morrison's voice carried absolute conviction. Some things matter more than careers or pensions. Integrity, honor, making sure the next generation understands the difference between necessary violence and political murder. Before Sarah could respond, her phone buzzed with an urgent message. Winters requesting immediate presence at battalion headquarters. Morrison 2. Classification level that made Sarah's stomach tighten. They arrived to find a briefing room containing Winters Hayes' 2 CIA officers and secure video links to agencies Sarah recognized by classification markers, even if names weren't displayed. Winters got straight to it. 3 days ago, Colonel Morrison's ranch in Montana was attacked. Unknown force military-grade assault, extensive damage. Security footage recovered shows the assault was led by Alexei Volkov. He displayed images. Morrison's home burning. Evidence of professional military operation. Volkov clearly visible directing his team. Morrison's expression went hard. They were looking for my training archives. 40 years of notes, techniques, methodologies for developing snipers. Everything I learned from Cold War operations through Gulf War, through training Mitchell and dozens of others. The CIA officer continued. They didn't find the archives because you moved them to secure storage last month. But now Volkov knows they exist, and we've intercepted communications suggesting he knows where they are. Hayes asked the practical question. How would he know the location? Because only 3 people knew where Morrison stored those archives. The colonel himself, Staff Sergeant Mitchell, and one other person. The officer displayed a photo. Captain Derek Walsh, age 42, former student of Colonel Morrison from 2008 through 2010, currently works as private security contractor. Sarah studied the image. She remembered Walsh vaguely, competent shooter, ethical problems. Morrison had removed him from the sniper program for taking bribes from defense contractors. The officer continued. Financial records show $2 million deposited to Walsh's offshore account 3 days ago, same day as the ranch attack. We believe Walsh provided information about the archive's location in exchange for payment. Morrison's jaw tightened. I trained him for 3 years, thought despite his flaws, he understood honor. Obviously, I was wrong. Walsh has agreed to meet Volkov's people tomorrow at midnight. Location is the storage facility in northern Montana. He'll exchange the archives for additional payment. We can't send official forces because this is domestic jurisdiction. FBI authorization would take 48 hours. By then, the archives are gone. Morrison stood. Then Mitchell and I retrieved them ourselves. Unofficial. Personal. Winters frowned. Colonel, you're 68 years old and officially retired. I'm an old soldier protecting 40 years of American sniper knowledge, and I trained Mitchell to be the best. Together we can handle one traitor and however many contractors Volkov sends. Sarah spoke quietly. If this is a trap, Hawk, then we spring it together. Your father and I served so the next generation could be free. Time to prove that's not just empty words. The drive to Montana took 18 hours. Sarah drove while Morrison checked weapons and reviewed satellite imagery of the storage facility. They spoke little, professionals preparing for work that required focus over conversation. Morrison finally broke the silence as they crossed into Montana. Last time we went to a range together, you were 24, made an 1,100-meter shot first try. You said good enough for government work, then made me do it 10 more times. Because good enough isn't good enough when lives depend on better. Your father taught me that in Beirut. I taught it to you. Now you'll teach it to the next generation. They arrived at the facility near midnight. Isolated location. Perfect kill box. Sarah studied the approach with tactical assessment that had become automatic. Vehicle tracks. Recent. Multiple hostiles already positioned. Volkov's not subtle, Morrison observed. This is clearly a trap. Knew it would be. Question is whether Walsh is willing participant or coerced hostage. They infiltrated on foot using techniques Morrison had taught and Sarah had refined. Moving through terrain with the kind of natural navigation that predated GPS and would outlast it. Morrison moved well for 68. Decades of staying in shape. Understanding that retirement didn't mean letting skills atrophy. From elevated observation, they glassed the facility. 20 contractors visible. Professional positions. Overlapping fields of fire. Walsh in the central building of the Volkov. Through binoculars, Sarah read body language. He's not a hostage, he's negotiating. Morrison's face showed the particular pain that comes from betrayal by someone you'd invested years training. I taught him for 3 years, thought he understood what these archives represent. The sacrifice, the blood, the American soldiers whose lives depend on this knowledge being passed to the right people. Money beats honor for some people. Not for us, not for your father, not for anyone who understands what service actually means. Sarah studied the terrain, calculating. Ridge at 1,650 meters northeast. Elevation advantage. Clear sight lines to the facility. Morrison looked at her. 1,650. Sarah, even for you, that's. Father made 1,200 in Beirut. I made 1847 in Afghanistan. You taught me to always exceed previous best performance. 1,650 is just mathematics. In darkness, with mountain winds that'll shift unpredictably. She smiled slightly. With you spotting and calling corrections easy. Morrison gripped her shoulder. Your father would be simultaneously terrified and proud right now. The climb to the ridge took 40 minutes. They moved with deliberate care. Professional preparation for a shot that would require absolute precision. This wasn't combat stress and improvisation. This was planned engagement from a position they'd chosen with time to set up perfectly. Morrison established the spotting position with efficiency that showed 40 years of experience. Sarah built her shooting platform with the same methodical precision her father had described in his journal. Every sandbag placed deliberately, every angle calculated, every variable accounted for before the moment when variables would matter. Morrison scanned through his spotting scope, calling observations in the calm voice Sarah had learned from a decade ago. 20 hostiles, Walsh and Volkov in central building. Wind variable 8 to 14 miles per hour from northwest. Temperature 41 degrees. Humidity 68%. Sarah did the mathematics. 1,650 meters meant 2 full seconds of bullet flight time. The round would drop nearly 20 feet from boreline. Wind drift would vary between 4 and 8 inches depending on gusts. Coriolis effect at this latitude added another 3 inches of drift. Temperature affected air density, which changed ballistic coefficient. Dozens of variables, each one requiring precise calculation. Miss any single factor and the shot failed. First target, Morrison asked. Communications specialist. Kill their coordination before they understand we're here. Morrison found the target through his scope. Sarah, this is the most difficult shot you've attempted. Longer than Afghanistan, less light, more wind variance. I know. That's why I need the best spotter in history calling my corrections. You ready? Always have been, always will be. The first shot broke the mountain silence like a judgment. 1,650 meters, nearly a full mile. The bullet took 1.9 seconds to cover that distance. Time enough for Sarah to cycle the rifle and acquire her next target before the first round impacted. Through her scope, she watched the communications specialist drop. Equipment destroyed. The enemy force's ability to coordinate suddenly severed. Morrison's voice stayed calm, professional. Hit. Wind shifting slightly left. Adjust point 3 mils. Second shot. Squad leader trying to organize response. He dropped before he could issue orders. Third shot. Machine gun position being established. The gunner eliminated before his weapon went operational. Volkov's contractors reacted with professional discipline, searching for the sniper. But they searched at 800 meters. Standard maximum engagement range. None of them considered that someone might be shooting from nearly a mile away in darkness with winds that should make accuracy impossible. Morrison called corrections like conducting a symphony. Wind gust coming, hold, steady, now. Sarah fired. Another hostile eliminated. The enemy force starting to understand they were being systematically destroyed by a threat they couldn't locate or fight. After the eighth casualty, Volkov understood. Grabbed his radio, and Sarah could imagine his voice even from this distance. Professional, angry, respectful. His remaining forces converged on the central building, using Walsh as a human shield, surrounding him with contractors in overlapping positions that blocked clear shots. They're protecting Walsh, Sarah observed. Can't get a clean angle. Can you make the shot if an opportunity appears? She calculated. Walsh visible through a window, two contractors partially blocking. If he moved exactly 40 centimeters left and the contractors shifted to follow, there'd be a 0.3 of a second window. Barely possible. Need Walsh to move left and the contractors to adjust their positions. Could take hours, might never happen. Morrison settled into observation position. Then we wait. Your father waited 6 hours in Beirut for his shot. Patience is mathematics too. Understanding that sometimes the right moment is worth waiting for. 90 minutes passed, Sarah maintaining her position despite cold settling into her muscles, despite cramps from staying motionless, despite the physical discomfort that came from extended sniper work. Morrison called environmental changes as they occurred. Temperature dropping, wind shifting, humidity rising, each factor requiring Sarah to recalculate her hold. Then Walsh moved toward the file cabinets containing the archives. The contractors shifted to follow, creating a window that Sarah's mind processed in microseconds. Morrison saw it simultaneously. Now, wind steady at 9 miles per hour, temperature 39, window open for 0.4 seconds. Sarah's breathing stopped. Her finger compressed the trigger with pressure she'd practiced 10,000 times. The rifle fired and cycled, and she was already firing again before the first round reached its target. Through her scope, she watched the first bullet pass between two contractors and, through the window, impact the file cabinet inches from Walsh's head. He froze, understanding exactly how close to death he'd just come. The second round destroyed the lock on the archive case. Sarah keyed her point. Walsh, next shot won't miss. Step away from the files. Now. Walsh stepped back, hands raised, face showing terror and comprehension. Understanding that an invisible sniper had just demonstrated perfect precision from an impossible distance. Volkov's remaining forces began evacuating. Professional contractors understanding when a contract had become too expensive to continue. But Volkov himself stayed. Curious. Professional interest overriding survival instinct. His voice came over the radio, accented English, respectful. Mitchell, is that you at 1,650 meters? Confirmed. Remarkable, I'm 55 years old. Spetsnaz veteran of Soviet-Afghan War. Made 1,100-meter shots in these mountains in 1985. Thought I understood the limits of what human skill could achieve. You understand limits perfectly. You just learned where yours end and mine begin. Why not kill me? You clearly could. Because old soldiers like Colonel Morrison taught me that some enemies deserve death. Others deserve a lesson they'll never forget. You're the latter. What lesson? That American snipers aren't just skilled. We're dedicated. Those archives represent 40 years of knowledge, sacrifice, Blood. American soldiers who died so others could learn to protect their brothers. We don't defend them with guns alone. We defend them with commitment to ensuring the next generation exceeds us. Silence on the radio, then Volkov spoke with genuine respect. Understood. From one professional to another, we're done here. Good choice. FBI arrived 20 minutes later. Walsh arrested. Archives secured. Morrison and Sarah watched sunrise paint the Montana mountains in colors her father had described from Beirut. Amber, copper, the light that connected 3 generations of snipers across 4 decades. That was the hardest shot I've ever made, Sarah said quietly. But you made it because I trained you, because your father's ghost guided you, because 40 years of American sniper excellence flows through you. Morrison paused. What happens now? Now I train the next generation. Pass on what father started, you continued, and I've proven. Someday a student I train will exceed even what I've done. That's how legacy works. 6 months later, Sarah taught an advanced course to 12 students who'd proven themselves worthy. Morrison was a regular guest instructor. Brooks had become a dedicated sniper candidate. Harrison was developing into an instructor himself. The next generation learning from those who'd learned from those who came before. Morrison gave a lecture on the mathematics of impossible shots, not the mechanics, but the philosophy. Your instructor made a 1650-meter shot in darkness to protect American knowledge. Not because she's special, because she worked to be special. 10 years of daily practice. Trusting mathematics when fear said run. You want that capability? Earn it the same way she did. After class ceremony, Lieutenant Colonel Winters presented Sarah with a wooden case. Inside, carefully maintained and restored, lay her father's original sniper rifle from Beirut. The M40A1 that had made impossible shots 42 years ago. The weapon Robert Mitchell had used on the last day of his life. A note in Morrison's handwriting, Robert Mitchell's rifle, made impossible shots 1983 Beirut, now belongs to daughter who exceeded his legend. Use it to train those who will exceed yours. Hawk. Sarah held the rifle her father had held, felt the weight of legacy, physical connection to a man she barely remembered, but whose mathematics had shaped her entire existence. She addressed her students. This rifle made a 1,200-meter shot saving embassy personnel, Beirut, October 1983. My father died that day, but his mathematics lived in the journal I memorized. Colonel Morrison taught me to honor those mathematics by exceeding them. Now I teach you. Not so you become me, so you become better than me. That's what legacy means. Each generation pushing further than the previous. Standing on shoulders of those who came before and reaching higher. That night, Sarah took her father's rifle to a range. Morrison appeared as she was setting up. Trying to exceed yourself again? Always. You taught me that's the only way to honor what came before. Your father would be proud. Beirut 1983. He made a shot that defined possible for his generation. Today you define possible for this generation. And tomorrow a student you trained makes a shot that exceeds yours. That's not defeat. That's victory. That's legacy continuing. Sarah chambered around in her father's rifle, set a target at 1,900 meters, farther than she'd ever attempted, distance that pushed beyond even her capabilities. But Morrison had taught her that limits existed to be tested. That impossible was just mathematics waiting for the right person to solve it. She calculated every variable. Wind, temperature, humidity, altitude, the slight downward angle, Coriolis effect, bullet drop. Every factor her father had documented and Morrison had taught her to master. The mathematics said barely possible, probability low, conditions marginal. She whispered to her father's ghost, "Watch this, Dad." Breathing stopped. World narrowed. Trigger compressed with perfect pressure. The shot broke clean. 2 seconds of bullet flight through darkness. 2 seconds where mathematics and physics and human skill merged into a single moment of truth. Distant clang of steel. Perfect hit at 1,900 meters. Morrison laughed with pure joy. Robert Mitchell just smiled in heaven. Sarah smiled back. No, he's smiling because someday one of my students will make a 2,000-meter shot. And they'll whisper, "Watch this, Staff Sergeant Mitchell." That's when he'll really smile. That's the mathematics of legacy. Impossible becomes possible. Possible becomes expected. Expected becomes foundation for the next impossible. And the cycle continues. They stood together under stars that had witnessed her father's sacrifice in Beirut, Morrison's dedication through decades of service, and Sarah's journey from 8-year-old girl with a journal to the most dangerous sniper in American history. 3 generations connected by mathematics and violence, and the understanding that excellence required sacrifice. That legacy meant preparing the next generation to exceed you. That honor meant using gifts to protect rather than destroy. The rifle her father had carried, the training Morrison had provided, the students Sarah would shape, all part of an unbroken chain stretching back through Cold War operations and Gulf War conflicts, and the endless human need for warriors who could make impossible shots when lives depended on it. Sarah Mitchell had exceeded her father's legend, had proven Morrison's sacrifice worthwhile, had become the ghost that foreign intelligence services feared and American soldiers trusted. But her greatest achievement wasn't the shot she'd made, it was the legacy she was building. The next generation of snipers who'd carry forward the mathematics of impossible becoming inevitable. Standing there in Montana darkness, holding her father's rifle with Morrison beside her, watching the same stars Robert Mitchell had seen on his last night alive. Sarah understood what legacy actually meant. Not being the best. Being the bridge between what was and what would be. Between fathers who died serving and students who'd lived because someone taught them well. Between impossible mathematics and inevitable solutions. The cycle would continue. Had to continue. Because somewhere tomorrow or next year or next decade, American soldiers would face impossible situations. And someone trained by someone, Sarah taught, would make a shot that saved lives. That was worth more than any medal or recognition or fame. Worth the sacrifice. Worth the dedication. Worth every hour on every range, in every weather condition for 10 years, learning to trust mathematics over fear. The ghost wasn't a person, it was a legacy. And Sarah Mitchell was ensuring that legacy would outlive her, just as her father's mathematics had outlived him, one shot at a time, one student at a time, one generation preparing the next to exceed them. The mathematics of legacy, impossible becoming possible, becoming expected, becoming foundation for the next impossible.